So how about that Jordan Peterson, huh?
Lobster Daddy.
That what ContraPoints is her name.
Yeah.
She's got some good points.
Yeah.
So, welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor. Today we're talking about Jordan Peterson.
The man, the enigma, the raging dumpster fire of different ideas.
Who is he? What does he think? We're going to jump in and we're going to actually explore some of his ideas and also some of the perhaps political ramifications of some of the more inflammatory things he's said. Just kind of explore him as an individual without judgment and without taking any sides, but just an exploration.
I don't know. We might be taking
We
some
might
sides.
be taking some sides. We'll see. I don't know.
Before we get into the episode, just a fair warning that we're two musicians who like to talk about topics that are sometimes slightly beyond us. If we say anything that's inaccurate or just flat out wrong, please send us a nice email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com and let us know what it was. Thanks for listening.
There's definitely things I disagree with about what Jordan Peterson stands for, and some of his points are, I think, a little off, but he has a lot of really interesting ideas also on certain subjects, and I think they're worth exploring as well.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can throw everything out about. Yeah, I don't think you can throw everything he said or written out as being completely untrue, because there's some good stuff mixed in there. Yeah, and as much as people will try to discredit him as like a pseudo intellectual, whatever. I mean, he taught at Harvard for a while and like is a professor at like a fairly big university, and students give really, I think, like positive reviews of his classes and all that stuff. So like you can't totally just like discredit him.
Mm-hmm. So where should we start? What do you want to talk about him first?
I think we have to get all the controversial stuff out of the way first.
Oh boy, that'll take a while.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean,
so what do you think is the biggest controversial element about Jordan Peterson?
well, so the main thing that made him famous in the beginning was his opposition to this Canadian human rights law that added gender and sexuality to the list of things that it was legal to discriminate people based on.
Illegal too, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his main issue was on the use of pronouns other than he, him, his, or I can't do the
he or she.
yeah pronouns other than the use of pronouns other than he, she.
He, she. That's I still don't know if that's a politically correct term, Trevor.
It's not actually.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, derailing pretty fast. Maybe it's the edible use over the past few days, but I can't think of he, him, his, and she, her, hers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Somehow that wasn't. Anyway,
So, you want to like
that
say
was
that whole thing again now?
yeah, maybe so. So I think that the main thing that he became known for, and the thing that was like the first controversy that really made him famous, was his opposition to this Canadian human rights law that added sexuality and gender identity to the list of things that it was illegal for people to discriminate based on. And in particular, he took issue with the use of any pronouns other than he, him, his, or she, her, hers. And of course, this is something that concerns the transgender community pretty directly.
Yeah. So what's his argument here? Why is it a fair thing to discriminate against people on those grounds?
Well, his main issue is I think wasn't with discrimination in its own right. It was I think specifically about the gender pronouns thing, and he felt like it was the government forcing him to use certain language that implied things he didn't believe in. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that, he could be prosecuted over that or whatever.
Right. So he feels like this legislation is saying that he has to use certain words. It's like enforced speech, right? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Something like that.
Hmm.
And it also went along with like there are 400 different pronouns now, and I have to memorize all of these and yada yada yada, which just like isn't it's kind of beside the point. But yeah, it was weird though, because in interviews he'll like, people will ask him, if it wasn't for this law, would you call people by the pronouns they prefer? And he'll be like, no. But then when they ask him about the law itself, they
Well, actually, I'm not so sure about that, because one of the videos that I think we both watched was a clip from Joe Rogan interviewing Jordan Peterson on his podcast. And in that interview, Jordan Peterson did say emphatically that he would use people's preferred gender pronouns. Specifically, he mentioned in cases of male to female or female to male. And he said he would take it on an individual by individual basis, as it is an individual decision, but that as a whole he would respect that. Then he took issue with what he calls made up words like Z and all other like 70 different gender pronouns, and I don't know. To that extent, I actually think he has a point there, that like to enforce that kind of language in legislature is maybe problematic.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. He did, he said he would, he would only stick to the binary though, right? He wasn't willing to use like they, them, theirs.
Yeah, so that was the biggest question for me, because it seemed to me obvious, like, obviously he'd be okay with they, them, theirs as a singular, and it just like totally makes sense with the argument that he's just made. And why wouldn't he? I mean, it's an accepted part, like it's an accepted usage in normal language, even separate from like gender identity.
Yeah. No, Shakespeare used it.
Yeah. Like,
it's,
for example, someone I don't know commented on our YouTube video. They said this, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it a man? Is it a woman? I don't know. Is it neither? I don't know. So I'm just going to say they.
Yeah. Yeah, you never say like
he or she.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's not common usage at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, what you just said, that he actually is in opposition to using they as a singular.
Right.
Which is just, I don't understand it. It completely undercuts the actual sense he was making up until that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've never met anyone who wants to be called anything other than he, she, or they. Like, I've never met someone who like wants to use any of the other
Mm-hmm.
like pronouns that are out there.
Yeah. And while I don't necessarily take issue with anyone choosing to use that language to describe themselves or others, I think it might be missing the point of language to try to install that dramatic intentional shift in grammar and words, because the way that language evolves, it's not it's not an intentional conscious decision that we make. It's a natural response. It's the way that we use the language, it evolves itself, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's inevitably like the younger generations that are gonna
Mm-hmm.
like produce the innovations and the new features of language.
Yeah, and so to try to enforce any particular language through legislature is not taking into account that natural evolutionary process within the language.
Right. Well, and I think the people who were behind the legislation pushed back and said that he was completely misunderstanding what the law actually said, and that I think he was kind of blowing it out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously, like, the state policing language is a bad idea to a certain degree, but I think the law wasn't that extreme.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that a lot of people who are in trans right activism feel it's necessary to lean in hard to this disruptive language, right? It's just disrupting our naturally learned processes of language and trying to instill this artifice that has been created, this intentional structure that has been designed to be ideally inclusive and beneficial for everyone. And that disruptive nature could be argued to be an essential facet of the change in order to disrupt the previous pattern to create space for the new pattern.
Mm-hmm. But you're saying the new pattern might not necessarily be what the new system that's there now.
Well, what I'm saying is, I understand that a lot of people may take that stance, and to me, it still doesn't quite get all the way. I think it's more relevant that language just simply does not evolve in that way. It is a natural process, and to try to influence its flow intentionally across a whole culture is not a practical approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely not. Yeah, you're right. It's definitely not practical.
And that maybe it's not even necessary in order to embrace everyone and make a loving, nurturing an environment that everyone can feel safe in. You don't need all of those different deviations from our language as it is. Please tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing anyone out here, but it seems to me that using he, she, and singular they pronouns can cover all of the spectrum in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's really for us to say.
Yeah, and that's why I stress. Please tell me if
Yeah.
I'm missing something huge here, because that is what I can see, and I acknowledge that I may not have the whole picture, and would love to learn more about any individual who doesn't fit into that, because that would be fascinating. But I don't
Yeah,
see it at the moment.
yeah. I think it's safe to say that human gender doesn't even, I think those three categories probably don't really even do it justice.
Sure.
But it's a question of kind of like you said, how practical it is.
Mm-hmm.
Until people become comfortable enough with the idea that there's more flexibility there.
Yeah, certainly. And that, like even Jordan Peterson was saying, each individual is so unique that it deviates on an individual to individual basis. And so maybe rather than trying to formulate a language that encompasses each individual, maybe it makes more sense to treat each individual separately and not to make assumptions about them just based on whatever pronouns are being used.
Yeah, of course. You have to treat everyone as an individual, no matter what.
Mm-hmm. For example, I feel sometimes, and a lot of this language is coming from having spent 5 years in Boulder. I feel sometimes like I have some elements of myself that are decidedly feminine, and also some elements that are male, and yet the composition that makes that up and makes sense to me is that I'm still male,
Yeah, no, and same here. Like I'm aware that I have like certain aspects that are definitely more feminine than people would expect for just like a dude, as like an umbrella term.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, lots of different things can exist under just the umbrella of like maleness.
Yeah, maleness or femaleness or theyness. I think they is a really powerful term that can encompass a lot, because it could refer to someone who has both male and female elements in substantial quantities, or it could refer to someone who feels they have neither. It's a very versatile term.
Right. Yeah, I really wish we could get past the whole debate on.
Yeah. Okay, so back to Jordan Peterson. Why the fuck doesn't he want to use singular they? Doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who's listened to our past episode or episodes on the intellectual dark web, that the whole transgender rights issue seems to be something that all of these guys just have an incredible amount of like vitriol for. And just like or not vitriol, but like they think like the whole thing is overblown, I guess.
So it's interesting that you used the word vitriol, because I actually have an idea on where this reaction is coming from within Jordan Peterson. Now, it seems to me like he's a very intelligent person. He recognizes facts, and he is fully capable and willing to embrace logic. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, he's obviously a very, very smart dude.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to see a fact that is in contradiction or revealed some hole in his reasoning, don't you think you would probably accept that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's one of those people who who doesn't shy away from debating people who has different views from him, and tries to as long as he thinks that you're debating in good faith, to try to take your points into consideration and consider that he might be wrong and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. And he also seems to have I'd almost say a devotion to the truth. It seemed to me in some of his motivational speaking, it was all about looking into yourself, seeing what's really there, really wanting to know the truth, facing what it is, no matter what it is, and accepting that. I think there's something really powerful in that.
I find that powerful too. Yeah, I think he does have some kind of roots to his thinking that keep coming up over and over again, though, which are like the primacy of childbearing as being basically the primary reason for our existence. Which, I mean, especially when he talks about like men and women, he says like, oh, well, women have everything already figured out for them because their primary purpose is obvious. It's to have kids. And men have to figure it out.
Whoa. Hang on a second.
Yeah.
So he's rooted in some very traditional gender roles.
Yeah. And I think religion also, or at least quote unquote Judeo-Christian values, comes into play. And like the idea of maintaining the traditions of the West, that kind of thing.
Can you talk a little bit more about that last point, maintaining the traditions of the West? How do you mean?
Well, it's an interesting question. So I think what he means is well, one of the things he constantly rails against is this idea of postmodern neo-Marxism, which so postmodernism, right? That's kind of within at least philosophy. That's kind of the idea that we can't really know anything, right? That modernism was kind of the Enlightenment, where everyone was thinking that through science and reason and logic we can figure out how the world works and come to conclusions and improve the world. And postmodernism is the idea that who knows what we really know? Do we really know anything? Maybe it's all like this huge facade. And I think he sees that as dangerous and a threat to the more the kind of Enlightenment thinking ideas that he considers to be emblematic of the West.
Yeah, he does seem to have a sort of a vitriolic reaction against what he calls the postmodern neo-Marxism, doesn't he?
Yeah. And of course the neo-Marxist side is the skepticism about capitalism and all that kind of stuff.
The skepticism about capitalism, so you're saying that neo-Marxism is the skepticism about capitalism, like seeing the holes in it, thinking that no, it won't hold water over time.
Yeah, and how it just kind of perpetuates patriarchy and like big differentials in power and oppression and all that stuff.
Well, Jordan Peterson would say, there is no patriarchy. What patriarchy? So I guess that's why he hates him so much. Yeah, in one interview that we'll link to, he seems to be really harping on these postmodern neo-Marxists, and to him it seems to mean, as far as I can tell, he has this image of these people who are resentful for existing. They feel that they have been done a great injustice by being brought into the world, and want to punish the people who did that to them. How do you feel about that idea?
I mean, that definitely strikes a chord with me, given the antinatalist stuff we've talked about, because that's kind of right up that alley.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It pushes me to be like aware of those tendencies in myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that can totally discredit everything that he's criticizing.
Yeah. So
Like
so
the,
certainly there are people who do believe that, and that may even be what I know for a fact. I personally have in the past felt that same resentment.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if I don't in that statement is he talking about like kind of the stereotypical like and we'll get into incels later probably, but like, the white kind of disillusioned guy who, can't get a girlfriend and can't hold down a job and is just kind of disillusioned with the society? Or are we talking about like social justice warrior, like trying to tear down the all the structures of society, that kind of thing?
That's the question, because it seems to me and other people who we have done some research on, for example, ContraPoints on YouTube.
Natalie Wynn, I think it's
Natalie Wynn?
Yeah.
For example, Natalie Wynn on YouTube makes the point that perhaps Peterson doesn't make any sort of clear distinction between those, that maybe this category he's created, the postmodern neo-Marxism, encompasses a whole lot of different categories, and he sort of sees them all as one particular unified enemy front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think she goes on to say he also lumps them in with identity politics,
Mm.
which is very much a Western philosophical idea.
Mm. That he wants no part of and doesn't consider to be the West.
Yeah. So I think what she said specifically is that identity politics is like the opposite of postmodernism, because identity politics is all about like defining these different categories, right? And postmodernism is about breaking down all the categories and breaking down all the boundaries and the structures and all that kind of stuff. So they're like postmodernism and identity politics are actually kind of fundamentally opposed.
Interesting. So they perhaps even postmodern neo-Marxism is a contradictory term in itself.
Yeah.
Interesting. So this is what's so interesting to me about Jordan Peterson, because he's a man of logic. He respects facts and logical thinking, and yet he also seems to have this broiling resentment towards this hypothetical group of people, which he perceives to be a very real force in the world. And somehow the two, because he's so smart and lucid, he's not going to allow any direct contradictions within himself. For the most part, he's always going to root out those contradictions in the pursuit of logic. And yet he somehow is managing to dance around this impulse that is driving a lot of his rhetoric. And that impulse is just, the way I see it, a visceral gut reaction, a feeling of resentment, that almost maybe even a physical thing more than an intellectual one.
You mean he's feeling that resentment?
I do get that sense, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, he yeah, and I can't tell quite where it's coming from, but it seems like the issues he's talking about really strike a nerve with him. And I don't know if it's like that he thinks it's so obvious what the defects are in the things he's pointing out, or whether they like touch some kind of like deeper emotional point with him.
Yeah, I think only one man in the world can tell us the answer to that. One thing that I'd like to mention, though, is that it seems that he in grouping all these different categories of people together into this one umbrella category that he has disdain for, he is in effect, he does make some good points. Like these things that he sees as problematic, there are really people who hold these contradictory problematic views that he puts forward, and yet they're not representative of the entire group that he is pushing back against. They are merely the minority, the extremist minority with the loudest voice. And he, rather than listening to the more subtle, intentional, nuanced points by the more level-headed members of the group, he reacts only to the loudest, most inflammatory members and groups the rest of them in with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is that the most inflammatory ends of those groups was starting to make its way into actual laws, like with the bill in Canada.
Mm.
So I think that might be the reason he was reacting so harshly there, is that the more extreme ends were starting to make their way into actual law. Although, I mean, you could argue whether that was actually true in that specific case, for that specific law. But I think, I think the reason he's reacting against those more extreme views is that they started to become mainstream. If you're enjoying the episode so far, we'd really appreciate if you consider supporting us somehow. You can go follow us on social media on Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website at postwave.com to see all of our past episodes, as well as some episodes we have coming up in the future. You can also go subscribe to us in your favorite podcasting platform and leave us a nice review if it's a platform that supports reviews like that. Thanks for listening. So I think maybe we got the whole transgender issue pretty well covered. Do you think we could move on to the differences between men and women, and how men have to choose their own way through life while women kind of have it provided for them?
Gosh, I just wish I had a daddy to take care of me. I'd get to look after the kids and give birth and stay in the kitchen, make sandwiches. That would be the life.
Yeah, I mean, he has this whole idea about how like the men all compete against each other in this hierarchy, and then all the women come along and just choose like the people highest in the hierarchy to mate with. And like, while I can see how that is true, like it completely disregards the idea that there are also women competing in that hierarchy.
Now, when you say that, do you mean parallel hierarchy and generalizing first for heterosexual relationships, just because that happens to be the majority in our society, and we can expand out from there? But do you mean a parallel hierarchy of women competing for the top males?
Well, I guess that's an open question, because you could imagine that women are also competing in some kind of hierarchy that like intersects with men's hierarchies, but they don't. And sometimes women and men are in competition, but in the end, when heterosexual people are considering a mate, they only look at the other gender's hierarchy. And so even though there's like men and women that are in competition, sometimes they're not in competition to find a mate. that makes sense. They're in competition
Mhm.
for like status within a certain
Yeah, and
company
so
or whatever.
that is in terms of competition for a mate, it is two parallel hierarchies, um, which the individuals can display their prowess by competing not only against the other men but against women as well to show their valuableness as a mate.
Yeah, so this kind of brings us to the whole incel
Yeah, what's an
thing.
incel for those who don't know?
Yeah, yeah. So it stands for
Mm-hmm.
involuntary celibate, I think, and yeah, it basically just means someone uh who feels like it's unjust that they can't
Okay.
get laid.
And what's the thinking there? How do people come to this conclusion?
Yeah. So I mean, so this whole thing kind of grew up on the internet, right? Um, I think a lot of it has to do with this kind of image of the ideal man as being like, this like super buff, uh, intelligent guy, and the fact that a lot of people don't feel like they're living up to that, um, and that the only reason they can't uh find someone who wants to date them is that they don't live up to this super idealized
Mm.
image. Like they're not, like they're good, they're just not, up to this standard that society holds them to. And but of course the reality is that it's
Mm-hmm.
it's almost always them.
Yeah.
And it's not that there's some like conspiracy against
Yeah.
men
And
within
so
the
what would Jordan
society.
Peterson say here to the incels?
Well, he actually, yeah, so he actually he said something kind of along the lines of what I just said, which is that if you find that no one wants to date you, the problem is it's probably you.
Yeah.
It's probably not society.
Okay. So why do
um,
people equate Peterson with being an incel?
well, I think it's that he talks about. Well, I think one of the reasons people associate him with uh, incels is he's referenced this idea of
Mm.
enforced monogamy a lot, which has yeah, if you weren't familiar with the term, you'd probably assume it means something it doesn't. Enforced monogamy doesn't mean that there's some high authority like mandating that everyone has to have a single mate. It's kind of the societal norm that polygamy is unusual and that monogamy is kind of what's expected. And his argument is that that's the only thing that's uh, keeping us from, he would say, degenerating into a society where polyamory is more common.
Gosh, heavens forbid. We can't have multiple people fucking each other.
Yeah, because that leads to
Yeah, how
because
does
that leads
that?
to violence.
How
I think was his actual
he
argument.
says that he seems to have evidence for that. In do you have any idea what that is?
I mean, the first example that comes to mind is Muslim societies where there's polyamory. I'm almost positive that's what he was. He said he referenced some anthropologist he had done
Mm-hmm.
the research with. I think it could be looked up. Yeah, but I don't think that's. I suspect
It's
there's not really a
interesting
strong
because
argument there.
he seems to speak authoritatively on this point, referencing that there is extensive evidence to back this up. I don't know if that's really true, but it seems like plausible given Peterson's devotion a lot of the time to upholding logic and reason. So it'd be interesting to see what sort of sources he gets those ideas from.
Yeah, yeah, it could definitely be delved deeper into. So I think this kind of brings us to one of the things you wanted to talk about, which was this idea about sexual selection, that it gives this kind of intentionality to life.
Yeah.
And that intentionality implies agency.
This was a really actually fascinating idea that he shared on the interview with none other than our good friend, Betty, old pal, Ben Shapiro. And okay, hang on a sec. So he puts forward this idea that we have a societal structure wherein women choose the course of evolution, and they do this by selecting mates with intentionality, whereas compared to, for example, baboons, the women will mate with anyone when they are in heat, and that is not the case with humans, because human women are selective and choose the most competent men, the most effective in the society, and say that is who I want to reproduce with, and in doing so they shape the future of our evolution with intentionality, with purpose.
Right. Didn't he go on to say, though, that because he was like, yeah, it appears that the women are making the intentional choices here, but actually the men over here who are creating the hierarchy are the ones who are actually,
yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah, so he said, okay, actually, but what really happens is the men get together and vote. He says vote on who of them gets to reproduce, and then the women choose the person that the people that the men voted on, and then he tags on like, but like with more selectively, but they pretty much choose like who the men chose. There's a hole here, I think. Do you see the hole?
I see at least a few holes.
A positive orgy of holes. No. It's almost polygamous. Can't have that.
What's the hole that you see?
The hole I see is that men don't vote on which of us gets to fuck the women.
You must have missed the
I signed up for the
happening.
early ballot, and I forgot to give them my updated address. Yeah. So what's he saying? Like, through competition, that is us voting?
Well, I think it's if you look at it from a corporate standpoint, people who rise up the ranks are kind of chosen by the people they work with and the people who supervise them to succeed and to get ahead and rise up in terms of prestige.
Okay, interesting.
I think that's kind of what he means. And he says something about, people want a competent leader. People want the person to lead them who's going to get them.
I think there may be some truth to that. The other thing I see, though, is when it comes down to direct competition between males for a mate, you don't see that. You see the opposite. You see every male, I mean, we kind of know this instinctively, every male says, well, I'm voting for yours truly,
What do you mean by that?
They will not cede to the individual male that they think would be a better mate and therefore be better for society, they're going to want to try to get their dick wet, and they don't care about the other guy's dick. You know?
Right. Yeah, that's obviously true if we're just talking about sex, but I think that's where the idea of just wider prestige within society comes in, because then people do care about picking the best leader, because a rising tide will lift all boats, and if they're part of the organization that is headed by a really competent leader, they'll rise up the ranks more than they would have otherwise if they had a less competent leader.
Interesting.
And no one's directly concerned with who else is getting their dick wet.
Huh. I hadn't thought about that. So, how else does this argument fall short then?
I mean, I think it's... Honestly, I think it might be basically true. It's just kind of uncomfortable to think about, and something that right now it kind of goes against all of our idealistic thoughts about love and finding a mate and all that stuff, because we want to believe that anyone has a chance potentially with anyone else, and that status and power have nothing to do with it. And sometimes they don't, but like on a grand average scale, I think it does kind of tend to be true.
And so this is where Peterson's idea of enforced monogamy comes in, where in a polyamorous society where you have the women dating or mating with only the very topmost selection of men, that only those people get to reproduce, and with a monogamous society, then the other people, everyone has a chance, basically.
Right, because the top, 3 or 4 guys aren't dating everyone.
Yeah, so he puts forward, so moving past that point, he puts forward a pretty interesting implication, I think, which is that by selecting mates, and hey, let's just generalize it, whatever the structure is, whatever it may be right now, and whatever it could hypothetically be within our species, we can just generalize this to say, by intentionally selecting mates, that humans are intentionally shaping the course of their own species' evolution.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty... I mean, that's just sexual selection. That's a pretty, widely accepted biological fact, isn't it?
And what was so interesting to me, though, is that he takes this in, again, against the term free will. People like yourself who do not like to use the term free will put forward things like our genetics are predetermined, and therefore we're not in control of those, and so we don't have free will. And I know that's a huge simplification of your stance, but it is a point that is often brought up, and the fact that through conscious decision, that is through ideological, through thoughts, we are shaping our genes as a species.
Right. Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. I mean, yeah, our genes are influencing our thoughts, and our thoughts are, it's like a feedback cycle, because our thoughts
Totally.
are influencing our genes.
And so I don't know. That just to me
Inevitably.
that speaks to a profound intentionality that goes beyond just the surface level.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I take issue with there is the idea that intentionality implies free
Mhm.
will, because we've talked about this already, but and he seems to think that consciousness somehow implies
Yeah.
free will, um, along with intentionality, which of course
Oh, of
I don't
course,
agree with
naturally.
that.
I
Of
think that's a
course.
very interesting idea, and maybe it's worth going into in our future a follow up free will episode.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a kernel of
Yeah.
truth here, and again, it's something that seems evident to me, and I can't quite put it into words right now. But there's something there, I swear it.
Yeah, I mean, it is really a beautiful idea that something as abstract as thoughts can influence like the very base level code of what makes us human.
Definitely. I mean, I think that's maybe the core of what people mean when they say that they have free will, is that ability to influence the material with thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course they're kind of
Yeah,
identifying with your
exactly.
thoughts.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Because it's separating your definition of yourself from the physical structure, the biological structure that represents what you are. But what you are is more than that. It's the ideological concepts that that body represents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something more abstract than just like
Yeah,
your
it's
actual
something
genetic code.
conceptual. It exists as an idea. And I think that's a core element of Peter's argument here, or his idea here, is that at the core of everything, you can say it's predetermined. You can say that the physical structure of the universe of 1 second ago determines the physical structure of it now, and so therefore we can't influence our future. It's all just a clockwork winding down. But that doesn't apply for living structures. So this is, he goes on and he talks about how living structures are dissipative structures. He uses this term. Have you heard this term before?
I hadn't heard it before, but I think he said he gets it from Schrodinger's
Totally.
book "What Is Life." I
Mm.
don't know if Schrodinger coined it, but
Yeah,
he
so a
talks about it.
dissipative structure. So it's something that's going against that flow of chaos, the clock winding down. We, the living, are the parts that don't do that. We go against that. And that's what is life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I looked a little bit into that, and I guess I didn't get far enough to understand exactly what the significance is, because it is true that we're, of course, when we're living, we're our entropy isn't increasing. Like we're kind of maintaining
Mm-hmm.
an island of stability, right? But I think it's also true that life is one of the most efficient ways to turn
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
energy
the
into
cost,
waste
right?
heat. And that, so of yeah, well, and of course we're
Mm-hmm.
increasing the entropy of
Yeah.
our environment, and we have to. That's the only way we can
Yeah,
maintain
and
the
that's the
stability
cost.
that we have.
That is what we pay in order to get the the livelihood, the agency, the ability to choose to do more of that.
Mm-hmm. So is this idea of dissipative structures tied to the idea of free will, or is it a separate
I
kind of thing?
definitely think there's a connection, although I don't know that I'll be able to draw a direct between the two. Because again, I think the point is that by living, we are going in contravention to the flow of that mechanical structure that's winding down the clock. And in doing so, we perhaps liberate ourselves from its confines, at least temporarily.
Yeah, and I just don't see how that's true, because I mean, obviously there are places in the universe where entropy isn't increasing, uh, apart from life.
Well, what it comes down to is the difference, as I've spoken before, between free will on an individual level and omnipotence. I'm not claiming omnipotence. Omnipotence would mean that over the course of the whole universe, you would have the power to go against that forever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying within finite constraints, you can go against that. You as an individual, the part of you that's not the entire universe, can go against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you are going to go against that
Until you die, and then you're not, right?
Right. But well, the thing though is you don't have any choice to not go against
I
it.
don't know that that's true necessarily. You could choose to die at any point.
Yeah. I guess I should say you can't choose to go
I
against
agree
that
completely,
and still
yeah.
live. Yeah, I guess I just don't see how it's more free to be tied to this contravention of increasing entropy rather than going along with the flow of it, because either way you're committed to the direction that you're going, if that makes sense.
I don't know that it I don't know that I follow it.
The only way that life can exist is in opposition to the overall flow of entropy in the universe. And if that's the only way it can exist, then how does that make it free?
Again, it's free within certain constraints. It's going back to the idea that in order to have any sort of existence at all, you have to have both a slice of the infinite and a slice of the finite. There's always going to be some constraint there, but that doesn't mean that you're unable to make decisions and influence your existence. It doesn't mean that you're unable to choose to exist or not.
Right. Of course, you can still make decisions and choices and all that stuff. I just think that, yeah, just because we're going against the entropic flow of the universe, it doesn't clear the bar of
Well, you can
implying
make that
there's free will.
assertion.
But I would.
Can I present to you a model that I think explains how it could actually go above that bar? Okay,
No.
thanks. This has been Postwave.
Go ahead.
So you would agree, though, that at any given point, you could have the freedom to either live or die. You can make that choice, right? Now,
Sure.
Now, let's just remind ourselves that oneself, one's identity, is a variable concept and could be represented rather than saying, I am this human structure. You could say instead, you are a composite of countless smaller structures, each of which is their own identity, is their own sort of consciousness even. And that perhaps that can
Mhm.
even go down to the very smallest scale of physical existence at all, where everything is constructed of points of perception. That is, whatever structure is capable of recognizing anything, right? Of perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on that structure,
Right.
it still makes sense to speak of these individual perspectives, individual points, as individuals, as entities even. And you can say that each of these points has the freedom to choose either to exist or not to exist. Now, if you have that freedom and enough random chance happens, enough points just completely randomly choosing to either be or not to be, it will eventually culminate into a form of binary code of a combination of ons and offs, which come together to represent ideas, concepts, and that is what everything is made out of. So on that fundamental smallest scale, everything is constructed of the freedom to choose to either exist or to not exist. And that any idea you can have can be represented by that binary code.
Huh. So I guess okay, if every, if if awareness goes down to the subatomic level.
Do you want to rephrase that? I think there's another like slogan or something that fits there.
Okay, but if it does, kind of like you were saying,
like how was I saying? What's the term for that?
How could
Go on, say it.
I'm going to exercise my free will and not say it.
Okay,
but yeah, if there's awareness on that microscopic scale, that isn't that kind of saying that it can't choose not to exist because it's always there intrinsically? Like how would some like particle of awareness choose not to exist if that is the fundamental nature of reality? Then there's like no choice.
No, because the fundamental nature of reality is that choice. It's not the on part. It's the ability to be either on or off. Like that's part of it. You can't cut it out of the picture.
But I don't know what it means for like a single atom to be either.
I would
on
equate
or off.
that,
like, what is that
in terms of physics of either existing or not existing, and we see that in subatomic particles popping into and out of existence.
Like in what?
They just do. We don't know why or how.
Are you talking about like virtual particles, that kind of thing? Yeah, I mean those are. I don't think that's exactly
wait,
what you're
hang on.
thinking of.
What is a virtual particle then?
I mean, from what I understand, I'm not going to be able to define it super technically, but from what I understand, it's not that there's actually particles popping in and out of existence. It's more of like a mathematical construct.
That's not my understanding. My understanding is that the mathematical construct is what is actually happening, and that's why it's physics.
Right. But well, Well, it's the thing. Like, have you seen Feynman diagrams of like particle
No,
interactions?
I haven't.
Anyway, it's basically this diagram of two particles interacting, and so like they both come together from the left, and they come to a line in the middle, and that line progresses, and then they split off at the end. And part of the point is to draw like every possible interaction that they could have, and a bunch of those consist of the like a virtual photon being emitted from like an electron or something, and then reabsorbed. And the idea isn't that actually happens; it's just kind of a statistical element you have to put into the calculations to get the right.
I don't think that holds water. I think that when we're talking about physics, if you have it as part of the mathematical things that you have to put in, every bit of that math represents something that's really happening. And even sum over paths, that was Feynman, right? Yeah. And even talking about Feynman, about his sum over paths theorem, which is in line with what you're talking about, the idea that for a particle to move from one point in spacetime to another, that it travels on every conceivable path to get there simultaneously, and that the average of all of those paths is the most direct. That is, yes, it's a mathematical abstract idea, and the concept is that is actually happening in every single instance, which is mind-boggling, but that is the implication, that it really is doing that.
Yeah,
I win.
You have a point there. Yeah, I was like skimming the virtual particle Wikipedia page while you were saying that, and yeah, it's like
free will does exist.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. Of course, we don't really know how much of quantum mechanics is right, or how much of any of our physics accurately, describes what's actually there.
Seems like a pretty good model as far as I can tell, anyway.
Where were we going with that?
Because you had some gripe about like but that isn't actually happening. It's just math. Particles popping into and out of existence.
Right. But are they deciding? Like,
yeah,
it just seems probabilistic, right?
Well, okay, this is an interesting point that I thought of after our free will discussion that I wish I'd thought of before. Is that probability is determined in large part by what you do and don't know, right? If there's two outcomes and you have no idea what's going to happen, then for you it's a 50-50 chance. But what if you go in and learn some details and you find out that, let's say we're looking at a game of chess and we don't know how the rules work, and we have two players, and you look at the board, it's halfway through the game, and you say, I don't know, I'm just going to say 50-50 one way or the other, because I don't know. As from my perspective, the best I can do is a 50% chance on either side. Then let's say we look into the details, we learn how chess works, and we look at the board and we say, hey, actually, in this board state, it's almost certain it looks like black is going to win, and white has no idea what the fuck they're doing. Then we can say there's, I don't know, a 99% chance that black is going to win, and see how vastly the predictions vary based solely on what we don't know. And so when you look at something externally, there's always some information about that experience that you're lacking. And so your predictive models are going to appear closer to random chance than to intentionality. And for me, the big implication of that is that from an outside perspective, conscious intention looks like randomness.
Yeah, because you're the further out in terms of time an event is, the more possibilities there are.
Yeah, totally. And even also
Right.
just saying that when you look at someone's experience that is outside of your own, you don't know all of the things that led up to them making the decision that they're going to make. And by that fact alone, you may perceive it as being random, when in fact there's a perfectly sound reason, or a reason for them to make that decision.
And how does that
So we
relate to
can
free will,
look
though?
at these things happening on whatever scale you want. We could put it on the particle level or anything, and you say, oh, well, that's just random chance. You think you're making a conscious decision, but really it's just random chance. Well, I think that's the most arrogant thing to suppose, Trevor. I think that because of what I've just said, you cannot know that individual's experience, and to say that just because to you it looks random doesn't mean that there isn't intention to it. And in fact, if it looks random, that might be even a good indicator that it is intentional.
Yeah, so you're talking about random from the perspective of an outside observer, not from the
Certainly.
perspective of the person taking the action. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it. When people talk about free will and randomness, I don't think they're talking about how random something appears from an outside perspective.
Trevor.
They're not talking about some other person looking at the person who's taking the action, and that outside person be like,
no,
oh, that's so
they
random
totally
that person
are.
did.
They're
Like,
saying,
could they have done
look
anything
at
more?
you didn't do that thing on purpose. You had no reason for it. Things just happened, and that's the way it is. They happened because of things that we don't know about, or things outside our control.
Well, it's always there's usually an obvious reason for the person to do the thing. It's not that they did the action without any reason or any motive or anything like that. It's that the circumstances that gave them that reason had were already set in
so
place.
maybe saving the free will discussion for a future episode. We can wrap that up and go back to Jordan Peterson.
Well, you asked me like what other, what holes do I see in his claims about hierarchies and women choosing the men at the top of the hierarchy and all that stuff. And the problem I see with that is that it only goes like one way between the genders, and I think you could argue it goes both ways. Like I think like we said, women are also competing in their own hierarchies, and I think men do tend to want to choose the people from the top of the hierarchies.
That's definitely true. That is something that happens. I agree. It's maybe important or interesting to recognize that there is a difference across genders generally for selectiveness of mates. I mean, it's kind of a trope even that women are much more selective and that men will fuck anything.
Yeah, I definitely, and that that contributes to it, the fact that it is kind of unbalanced. But I think to say it's entirely just women choosing men is inaccurate. But yeah, you're right. There is that dynamic you mentioned.
And I think it's really interesting to explore the actual structures that we see in our society in terms of selectiveness, and we can also maybe just generalize the concept as humans select their mates intentionally by aiming towards successful members of the community.
Yeah, I think that about does it for everything
God
else
is
I wanted
dead.
to say on that. God is dead, and the postmodern neo-Marxists killed him.